Who is Carrie? Chapter 1, Part 2 of Chapter 1. Why, I'm surprised you couldn't figure that out for yourself, Carrie. Figure out what? Well, just look at it, he said, bending around to look at me square on. You know about Dan's daddy fighting with President Washington during the war? I knew all about that. Dan Erebus told me about it 100 times, how his daddy was in the fighting at Trenton, and once he led General Washington's horse through a terrible rough stream and saved his life or some such, and Washington himself signed daddy's discharge papers. I know about that, Horace, I said. Well, when the war was over, they had a party for President Washington right at Mr. Francis's tavern. Not this one, the one we had before, over on Pearl Street. I knew that, too. When the war was over in 1783, General Washington had got all of his old officers together in the ballroom of the old tavern and made me a speech and shook everybody's hand and kissed them and such and cried, too, they said. The cooks couldn't talk of nothing else for weeks afterward, and they'd still start on it if you made a mistake and gave them a chance, how the first cook made a cake that Washington had held in his hand, and would have eaten too, except that he was all choked up from saying farewell and wasn't hungry, and how the second cook had made the punch that General Washington drank so it was nearly the same as if she'd touched him herself, and how the third cook had washed the silver mug he'd drunk out of, which was the same as touching him, because some of his spit was bound to have got on it, and naturally it come off on her when she'd washed the mug. Yes, Horace, I've been bored by that story frequent enough, I said. How does that make you and General Washington friends? Why, it's clear as day, Carrie. General Washington knew Dan's daddy, and Dan's daddy was Willie's uncle, and someday me and Willie are going to get married. It's clear as day. I laughed. Horace, you beat anybody I ever knew. His feelings was hurt. Don't you get uppity with me, Carrie, he said. "No, sir," I said. He twisted around to give me a look. But just then Mr. Francis came out through the kitchen door into the backyard. We jumped up. He stood there looking at us for a minute, and I knew one of us was in trouble. I hoped it was Horace, which was uncharitable, but more healthy. But it wasn't Horace. "What did you think of the spectacle this afternoon, Carrie?" Mr. Francis said, like he was making polite conversation. I got so hot and my supper began to set up like clay bricks in my stomach. What spectacle, sir?" "Why, General Washington's arrival, Carrie." He gave me a hard look. "You were there, weren't you? Or was it somebody who happened to look like you?" Sweat began to run down my neck, and the bricks began to knock around. "I reckon that was it, sir," I said. "You can't always recognize somebody from 30 or 40 feet away." He went on staring at me. "What put that particular distance in your mind?" I'd put my foot in it. There was nothing I could say, so I just looked down at the ground and went on sweating and feeling the bricks in my stomach. He stared at me some more, and then he said, "Just see that you don't run off like that again." And he went inside. I let out some air, and my supper began to get limp again. "I warned you about your blamed curiosity, Carrie," Horace said. So had everybody else. But I was lucky. Most any other master would have thrashed me for it.